Hi, I'm Jesse Mayshark. Welcome to Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. This is the first episode, so a little introduction is in order. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media organization dedicated to providing perspectives and amplifying voices of people doing good work and fighting good fights across the southern United States. Like those voices you heard at the beginning. Those were people at the Hands Off rally on April 5th, 2025, here in Knoxville, Tennessee, where I live. We're going to hear more from some of them in a bit. I'm the founder and publisher at the Progressive South, which I have launched with the support of some smart and committed people. You can find our mission statement and our board members on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. We care about the South. This is our home. This is where we have chosen to stay, chosen to be, chosen to come back to. And because we live here, we know there are a lot of voices that just don't get heard. There always have been. Exclusion of certain people, certain perspectives, and certain ideas is a through line of politics, economics, and culture in the American South. Our aim is to highlight and hear from some of the many people who are continuing the centuries-long work for real justice, opportunity, and freedom in the South. Grassroots activists, elected officials, religious leaders, nonprofit organizations, scientists and innovators, artists, business leaders, academics, media outlets, and many more. And we want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories and your voices. That includes in person. We'll be doing some public get-togethers over the next year as we visit different cities. We also have a number you can call to leave a voicemail and tell us about where you are and what kinds of things you're seeing in your community. Details about that at the end of the episode. It's probably important to define our terms a little. Progressive is one of those umbrella words, like conservative, that can cover a lot of ground and doesn't have firm boundaries. Broadly, we're talking about ideas, people, and groups on the American political and cultural left. From your center-left Democrats, to your democratic socialists, to your backwoods bohemians, and all of the many varieties of Southern free thinkers. In the interest of transparency, so that you know where I'm coming from, I would call myself a left liberal. I voted for Elizabeth Warren in 2020, if that helps. It didn't help her, I'm afraid. But we'll be hearing from voices across the progressive spectrum, including some that will probably disagree with each other, or with me, because people on the left do that a lot, and we need places to do it constructively, instead of just yelling at each other on social media. The other crucial word here is South. What do we mean by that in 2025? Is there still an American South we can talk about as a coherent place? I think the answer is yes. The South has changed over time, of course, but so many of the political and cultural currents that mark it now have direct lines to its turbulent and often ugly history. As Imani Perry wrote in her excellent book South to America, which won the National Book Award in 2022, paying attention to the South, its past, its dance, its present, its threatening future, and most of all, how it moves the rest of the country about, allows us to understand much more about our nation. To define the geographic borders for the purposes of this podcast and project, the South primarily and most obviously comprises the 11 states of the Confederacy. Because while the Civil War ended on the battlefield, it never really ended in the South. It continues to echo in these states, and it colors our politics and our distributions of wealth and power. Just in case you don't have the Confederacy memorized alphabetically, those states are Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. Beyond those bounds, we'll also be talking about Kentucky, most of which is more southern than it is anything else, including a vital part of southern Appalachia. These 12 states are home to about 119 million people, just over one-third of the U.S. population. Of course, about 55 million of those are in just two states, the behemoths of Texas and Florida. That's why those states have particular political power in the region, often setting agendas that the other states follow. Most of the southern states are, if it needs to be said, politically dominated by the modern Republican Party. Of these 12 states, 10 have Republican governors, the exceptions are North Carolina and Kentucky, Republicans control 11 state legislatures, with the exception of Virginia. And Republicans control 20 of 24 U.S. Senate seats, the exceptions of Georgia and Virginia, and 102 of 146 congressional seats. Much has been made of the shift among white Southern voters from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party over the past 60 years, and that's a topic that will come up in future episodes. But as anyone who lives here can tell you, there's more ideological continuity to the story than it may appear. Politically conservative white voters and business interests have dominated the South for most of its history, regardless of which party they called home. They still do. But they have never been the only voices in the South, just the ones with the bullhorns. The South, in its vibrant cities and in its small towns and farming communities, is a place of great diversity, not only of race and ethnicity, but of culture, geography, resources, and economic realities. The region encompasses a significant part of the United States shorelines along the Atlantic coast and the Gulf of Mexico. Yes, we're calling it the Gulf of Mexico. It includes historic port cities, along with the southern Appalachian Mountains, the Mississippi Delta, and the agricultural Black Belt that was the heart of the South's slave economy and its early political dominance. It is the home of great music and great food. Its metropolitan hubs, Atlanta, Miami, New Orleans, Nashville, Austin, are dynamic and vibrant centers of economic and cultural activity. Its multiculturalism has a tortured history, but for better and worse, its deep roots have nurtured much of what we know as America. Things are pretty crazy right now all across the United States. We're still in the early months of a presidential administration that appears determined to roll back civil rights of all kinds, for citizens and non-citizens alike. None of us yet knows how all that will turn out, but it is clear that the only thing that can protect our rights is the same thing that secured them in the first place. People of goodwill and determination working together to support each other and face down an abusive, overreaching government. The South is pretty familiar with that fight, not only because it has been the home to the greatest liberation movements in American history, but because we in many ways already live in the repressive reality that our current presidential administration would like to replicate nationwide. In most southern states, women no longer have ownership of their own bodies. A pregnancy resulting from any set of circumstances turns a girl's or woman's reproductive system into property of the state, which dictates what she can do with it, when, and how. LGBTQ people and transgender people in particular are the target of laws limiting their access to health care and seeking to push them back into the closet. These states' large populations of immigrants and refugees of all statuses have long been subject to the kind of rhetorical vitriol and fear-mongering now being amplified at the national level. Republican supermajorities are creating school vouchers intended to funnel public tax dollars to our wealthiest families and to unaccountable religious schools with fundamentalist curriculums and agendas. In our public schools, campaigns of fear and censorship are driving hundreds of books from library shelves. Here in Tennessee, my younger child just 3 years ago read Kurt Vonnegut Jr.'s Slaughterhouse-Five as part of his summer reading for 9th grade. This past fall, Vonnegut's classic was one of 48 books banned from the school system entirely under a new state law. All 12 of the southern states have so-called right-to-work laws, which aim to limit the power and organizing ability of labor unions. Many of them ban public sector unions altogether, and union membership overall is low. It ranges from just 2.4% of the workforce in North Carolina, the lowest unionization rate in the country, to a high of just 8.8% in Kentucky, home to some of the most famous labor fights in American history. The only civil right our legislators have shown enthusiasm for in recent years is gun ownership. Year after year, lawmakers have chipped away at restrictions on purchasing and carrying deadly weapons. Many Southerners have resisted these impositions. Progressive-minded people in the South are a minority, but we are a large minority. More than 22 million people in these states voted for Kamala Harris last year, not necessarily because they loved her or out of loyalty to the Democratic Party, although you can find both of those among Southern progressives, but as a vote against the expansion of the prevailing, stifling conservative orthodoxy in this part of the country. 22 million is a lot of votes. 1 out of 7 total votes cast nationwide in last year's election. We are underrepresented because of increasingly brazen gerrymandering in these states. But we are here nonetheless. And based on anecdotal sampling, we are, not to put too fine a point on it, pretty pissed off. The goal of the Progressive South and this podcast is to provide another platform for those voices and views. Not only for the anger, fears, and frustrations of Southern progressives, although those will certainly be articulated, but for the ongoing work on behalf of the people and places we care about. The grassroots efforts, the community organizing, the victories and achievements large and small across our states. There are people of goodwill in every city, county, and town in the South, working in countless ways for goals from healthcare access to environmental protection to racial justice to labor rights. We will be hearing from some of them in every episode. I guess I should give a little bit of my own background. You can read a longer bio on the website, but to answer maybe an obvious question right up front, if my accent hasn't tipped you off, I'm not from the South. Like many of the millions of people who live here, I grew up elsewhere and moved here. I was born in California, mostly grew up around Rochester, New York. I went to Penn State University and graduated with a degree in journalism in 1991. I first moved to Tennessee 3 years later and have lived here for most of the succeeding 30-plus years. I did take a sojourn in New York City for a bit, but like many people who have moved away from the South, I found myself drawn to move back. I've worked for print and digital outlets large and small, including as a copy editor in a department of the New York Times, as a daily newspaper reporter covering government, politics, and education, as reporter and editor for an alternative weekly newspaper in Knoxville that sadly no longer exists, still my favorite job ever. Like many journalists, as the industry struggled in recent decades, I eventually looked for work outside it. I spent 7 years working in communications for the city of Knoxville, serving as communications director for a politically progressive mayor in a city that, like many across the South, has trended increasingly liberal. We will no doubt be talking a lot about the tensions between blue cities and red states across the region. For the past 6 years, I've been co-publisher, editor, and reporter for a Knoxville digital news startup called Compass, which if you're curious, you can find at compassknox.com. I stepped back from my work there this year to do this, because so much of what I have seen, both covering and working in government and politics in Tennessee, has made me aware of how many progressive-minded people and organizations there are in the South, and how easy it is for us to feel marginalized and isolated. My plans for the Progressive South were well underway before last November's election. This is not a reaction to the second Trump presidency, but to the ongoing reality of living in the South. That said, the election and the early months of this administration have prompted a lot of talk and discussion on the left about the media environment in the United States, a belated recognition of the breadth and depth of the conservative media ecosystem, and the need for more independent progressive voices. I share that view, and so here we are. I wanted to also say a few words about the name of this podcast, Headlights. It is a metaphor, of course, for people who are lighting a way forward in dark times. But it is not my metaphor. It comes from an African-American newspaper in Memphis, Tennessee, the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight. It published for just 4 years from 1888 to 1892 and is best remembered as the journalistic home of muckraking civil rights reporter Ida B. Wells. A black woman born to enslaved parents in Mississippi during the Civil War, Wells grew up in the post-war South and was witness to both the promise of Reconstruction and its betrayal. As a journalist, she was the loudest voice raised in alarm at the growth of lynching as a tool of racial oppression and enforcement in the South. Her work infuriated the white leadership of Memphis, and in 1892 the offices of the Free Speech and Headlight were destroyed by a white mob, urged on by editorials in the city's white newspapers. Wells fled for her life and settled in Chicago, where she continued her fierce advocacy for racial equality and justice. No copies of the Free Speech and Headlight survive in any known collection. I've long admired Wells as one of the great heroes of American journalism and history. I hope to take a more detailed look at her life and work in a future episode. To give a little idea of how this podcast will work, most weekly episodes will begin with a news roundup of items and events of interest around the South from a progressive perspective. Then we will have a feature interview with somebody interesting doing interesting work somewhere in the South. And we'll end with a little arts and culture feature spot, because arts and culture are vital to Southern identity and community. So for this first episode, let's return to that hands-off demonstration at the beginning of April. This was a national day of protest. Wherever you live, there was probably some version of it near you. But it took on particular weight in deep red states, where people turned out in large numbers. A rally in Atlanta that day drew a reported 30,000 people. There were thousands in Nashville, Houston, New Orleans, Charlotte, all across the South. As you'll hear, many of the people I talked to at the Knoxville protest were surprised at the size of the crowd that turned out. This was not only because it was a Saturday with a lot of competing events downtown, or because it was unseasonably warm, peaking at 85 degrees at the height of the 2-hour demonstration. It was because a lot of people had never been in a like-minded crowd of that size. As people were moving into position, lining sidewalks around one of the city's busiest intersections and stretching for about a half mile along both sides of a major thoroughfare, I chatted for a few minutes with Amanda Collins. She's one of the organizers for Indivisible Knoxville, the local chapter of the national progressive group Indivisible. Collins became politically engaged as a parent during the COVID pandemic, advocating for protective health measures in public schools. A native of Alabama, she moved to Tennessee some years ago. She is active in the local Democratic Party and has run for the state legislature twice, challenging the Republican incumbent in a heavily Republican House district. She told me that the goal of the protest was to send a message about the ways the administration is endangering the country.
So part of what we do is try to educate everybody that we are all going to feel the effects of this in a very real way that most folks in my generation, the generation above, and definitely the generations below, have not yet, unless you're a woman.
As a local example, she cited cuts to the National Park Service. Knoxville is about 40 miles northwest of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the most popular national park in the country, with 12.2 million visitors in 2024.
And part of the reason that so many people locate in Knoxville is because of our amazing parks, the access that we have to the Smokies, and the way that, and not only the Smokies, but also the things that are managed by the Park Service in Oak Ridge, in Knoxville, that people don't even realize are part of that. So when Musk and Trump come for the Parks Department, they are coming for things that have kept you here, that have exponentially improved your quality of life, that bring other people to the area. And again, people need to understand what it can mean to them personally.
The national park was established in 1934 by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, just 1 year after the federal government created the Tennessee Valley Authority to provide electric power and flood control to the region, functions it still performs. East Tennessee has a large federal footprint, which is inevitably affected by decisions in Washington, D.C. 30 miles to the west of Knoxville is Oak Ridge National Laboratory, along with the Y-12 National Security Complex, which processes and stores enriched uranium for the nation's nuclear arsenal. Some federal employees at the Y-12 plant were fired in February in a mass wave of DOGE cuts, and then quickly hired back once administration officials realized what they actually did. I walked up a ramp and some steps to Western Avenue, which was already starting to crowd with protesters. Not everyone I spoke to was comfortable sharing names, a sign of the uncertainty some feel about the safety of public opposition. Jerry Ownby was not among those. I found him waving 2 flags, one American and one Ukrainian, and holding a sign saying "Save Social Security." Passing cars honked in support.
Got to do something, got to move, got to be a responsible citizen. That's why I'm here. I thought there'd be 12 of us out here. There's hundreds of us out here.
And sounds like you're getting a lot of support from the passing traffic, too.
That's right. That's right.
So what are the things that bother you the most? You have a sign talking about Social Security. What are you most concerned about?
Well, what bothers me the most is America has all my life helped and supported the good guys, and now fearless leader wants to throw the Ukrainian people into the clutches of the most evil dictator in the world, who has kidnapped 5,000 Ukrainian children, who has broken 22 previous signed ceasefires. What are we doing? Who voted for that? That's it.
So what difference do you think it makes to come out on a day like this? I see people online saying nobody cares, it doesn't matter.
I don't know. I think it will. I think we're in for a long fight. Here we go. What are you going to do? Stay home and watch television or stand up for your country?
One can, of course, question the idea that the United States has always supported good guys. But Ownby's anger at what he sees as a fundamental betrayal was palpable. And he was right that there were hundreds of people, many hundreds. Organizers ultimately estimated that about 4,000 attended the protest over the course of 2 hours. I have estimated a lot of crowd sizes, but the snaking contours of this crowd made it difficult. It was large, for sure. Down the sidewalk from Jerry, I found Cynthia, one of a group of women holding signs on a corner. She said she has lived in Knoxville since she was 2 years old.
Being concerned about the country, where we're headed, where it's going, and the economy, all of it. It's just I don't want to sit home and just want it to go away. I feel like it's important to get out and voice my opinion.
Tennessee's senators, Marsha Blackburn and Bill Hagerty, are strong Trump loyalists. So is our congressman in Knoxville, Representative Tim Burchett. You may have seen a photo of him laying hands in prayer upon Trump in the Oval Office, alongside Representative Lauren Boebert. I asked Cynthia if she thought any of them were likely to take much note of this particular gathering of constituents.
I'm hoping it makes some difference because sometimes I feel frustrated knowing that none of our senators and representatives are going to make any change at this point, but maybe if we keep on, maybe if enough people get involved, it'll make a change.
Like everyone I talked to, she was surprised and delighted by the size of the crowd.
I'm shocked, I'm thrilled, I'm hopeful. It makes me hopeful.
Across the street was a man with a gray beard and a sign that indicated he was a military veteran. There are a lot of military veterans in Tennessee, which first became known as the Volunteer State because of the number of Tennessee men who enlisted to fight in the War of 1812. I didn't get this particular veteran's name, but he was more forthcoming with his opinions, particularly noting some insults Trump has directed at the military and those who serve in it.
I guess my question, you have a sign saying you're a veteran, not a sucker or a loser.
Yes, sir.
You are a veteran?
Yes, sir.
What was your service?
I was in the Navy for 6 years.
And why are you here today?
Isn't it obvious? Anybody who says this about me, my fellow veterans, is a fool. And he said it.
And how do you feel about his overall approach to national security and the military?
There is no approach. He's ignorant. His staff are ignorant.
So what difference do you think it makes to come out and make this kind of show?
Look at it. How many people do you think we have down here?
Hundreds.
Yes. I think it's just the beginning. It'll get bigger.
Also feeling professionally attacked and concerned were some healthcare workers I approached.
I'm a healthcare worker, and quite honestly, she is too. But we're seeing more and more things that the government is taking control of healthcare, and it's sad. I'm also a person of color, and I feel like us minorities are feeling it more and more every day. And things need to change for the better.
Like the others I talked to, she was heartened by the large turnout.
Honestly, I'm shocked. I feel a lot of times we're kind of in our own little bubble, but this is really just incredible. So.
Along another block, I found a cluster of burly, bearded men wearing shirts and carrying signs that identified them as members of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. The IBEW is the 9th largest union in America, with about 820,000 members. It represents electricians, utility workers, telecommunications workers, and others. I spoke with Ryan Pendleton, who's from Ohio but was on contract at a site in Oak Ridge. He had attended the rally with some of his co-workers. He said they were particularly alarmed by the administration's disregard for collective bargaining agreements, CBAs, with federal workers.
Down here to let people represent, like we're representing, to stand up for our union, that our rights are being compromised with CBAs and all the agreements being dismanned, and it affects our wages and everything else.
So what worries you most from specifically a union standpoint about what's going on?
Well, if he breaks down all those conditions, we won't be able to go up and fight for a better living wage. Inflation's already a thing that we're facing now, that we can't reach those goals without having a voice to go and sit down with, whether it's the government or whoever we're going to work under each contract, without having a voice.
And, there was talk that Trump got elected with a certain amount of union support. How do you think people are feeling about him at this point?
I can tell you from our standpoint with IBEW, he wasn't endorsed by us, but that being the case, the unions are struggling that did endorse him. So
the protest ran for its allotted 2 hours without incident. Protesters remained on sidewalks and did not interfere with traffic. There was almost no visible police presence beyond a handful of cruisers parked quietly in nearby lots. As I said earlier, it's hard to know where any of this is headed, or what impact civil protests like the April 5th rallies can have on any of it. But what struck me most was how much it seemed to matter to those who attended. Over and over, people said they had felt alone. They didn't know so many of their neighbors had the same fears, frustrations, and aspirations. Ida B. Wells once wrote, "The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them." That is what the April 5th protesters were trying to do, in their own small ways, in communities across the South. And even if their elected representatives didn't hear them, they heard each other.
Hands up! 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 Hands up!
As I mentioned, I want to close each episode with an arts and culture note. These could be about upcoming events, or significant new books, or albums, or movies, or new exhibits at major museums. Today, what's on my mind is the indie rock singer-songwriter Ethel Cain. A native of Florida who grew up in one of the state's small towns, Perry, she achieved something notable last week. She became the first openly transgender artist to score a top 10 album on the Billboard Top 200 chart. Ethel Cain is the performance name of a 27-year-old trans woman named Hayden Silas Anidonia. She was homeschooled and raised as a Southern Baptist, and her music has often wrestled with the darker sides of faith, family, and sexuality. Through a series of EPs full of varied sonic textures and Southern Gothic imagery, Ethel Cain has built a growing and devoted, sometimes near fanatical, fan base. They made their presence known earlier this month, when she finally released a vinyl edition of her 2022 album, Preacher's Daughter. It sold 39,000 physical copies in its first week, which was enough in our current music industry landscape to place it at number 10 on the Billboard Top 200 Albums chart. Ethel Cain has already released another album this year, the dark, experimental Perverts, with a more mainstream follow-up promised for this summer. Her upcoming fall tour, playing in larger venues than the packed one in Asheville, North Carolina, where I saw her a few years ago, is sold out everywhere, including across the South: Atlanta, Dallas, Houston, Austin. She doesn't have any dates scheduled in her home state of Florida, where transgender rights have been under attack in recent years, as they are across most of the South. If she still lived in Florida, she would not be able to get a driver's license reflecting her gender identity and would be forced to use men's bathrooms in public buildings and some private facilities. It is unlikely that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis will be issuing any proclamations recognizing the cultural and commercial breakthrough of one of the state's native daughters. It is also unlikely that Ethel Cain or her fans care what DeSantis thinks of her. You can find her music on most streaming services, and her vinyl LP is in your favorite record store. A few words to wrap up. First, speaking of arts and culture, our rockin' theme music is by our good friends Bark, B-A-R-K. That is Tim and Susan Lee of Water Valley, Mississippi, and a few of their friends. You can find their music on streaming services, and there's a link to their Bandcamp page in the show notes. Many thanks to them for the dirt road riffing. Thanks to our intrepid producer, Lord Seth the Libertarian at Barbarian Productions. And many thanks to you for listening. If you want to hear more, you know the drill. Subscribe, like, and share. Tell your friends and family, even the conservative ones. We welcome all. And if you want to chime in, we have a voicemail you can call to say hi. Just leave your first name, where you're calling from, city and state, and take up to a minute or so to tell us something about what's going on there. What are you seeing or doing or concerned about? We'll play some of these on the podcast on a rolling basis. The number to call is 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. That is in the show notes as well. We will be getting out and about a fair amount as we talk to people in different places. When we do, we'll aim to organize some get-togethers at local spots, just to meet up and chat. I'm a big believer in the value of bringing people together in real life, not just in our digital enclaves. So you can watch our social media for any upcoming events. We are up on Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky right now. The Progressive South is a nonprofit, and so of course we would also love any other support you care to provide. Here's where we are on our nonprofit status. We are incorporated as a nonprofit company in the state of Tennessee. We are in the process of applying for our 501c3 designation from the IRS. But in the meantime, we have a 501c3 fiscal sponsor here in Knoxville, the great folks at Community Shares, and you can make tax-deductible contributions through them. Information is at the Donate tab on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. Community Shares is an umbrella funding organization here with a long history of supporting important programs and nonprofits. There's a link to them in the show notes as well. Speaking of our nonprofit orientation, that requires us to be nonpartisan in terms of endorsing candidates or urging votes one way or another. We won't be making any endorsements of candidates or party lines. We will certainly talk a lot about politics in our states and the parties that feature in them. But the reality is that from a progressive perspective, neither the D's nor the R's exactly have sterling records in Southern history. Our concerns are priorities, principles, and people, not parties. In fact, we'll hear some criticisms of Democrats next week when we head out on the road to Richmond, Virginia. In the capital of the Confederacy, we'll talk to a local organizer taking on a mostly Democratic city establishment. Come on along.